Now to tonight's guests and to discuss tomorrow's Victorian election and the past week in federal politics. I was joined a short time ago from Melbourne by opposition employment spokesman Brendan O'Connor and by Coalition MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Kelly O'Dwyer, Brendan O'Connor, thanks for being with us.
Lovely to be with you.
Good to be with you.
Let me start with you, Kelly O'Dwyer. What's the government's position on the GP co-payment?
Well, this is our policy. We brought it in our budget. It's our policy because we need to do two things. We have to make Medicare sustainable, and we also need to plan for the future health needs of Australians. We need to do that by creating a future fund which will have all of the research that's going to be vital for making the cures, the vaccines, all of those discoveries that are going to be necessary. Why do we have to have a price signal? Well, we have to do that because of the legacy that was left by the previous government. They did not deliver one surplus. They racked up debt, and now Australians are having to pay for that. Medicare itself has doubled over the last 10 years, and we know, according to the Commission of Audit, that it will effectively double again, going from $20 billion to just under $40 billion. Now, we need to make it sustainable, and we're prepared to make the decisions that will make that happen.
Brendan O'Connor, under what circumstances will Labor support a Medicare co-payment?
Well, we don't. We don't support a tax on visiting the doctor. We don't want to see parents choose not to take their kids to the doctor because they have to pay a fee. We don't want to see people unfairly treated. And
you don't think there ought to be some kind of price signal?
No, we do not, and we think this is completely contrary to what has been promised prior to the election by the Prime Minister. Now, we've got the Prime Minister and Treasurer saying two different things, but in the end they may be changing their tactics, but they want to keep the tax. It is a fundamental breach with the Australian people, because they said they would not be cutting health expenditure and they would not be imposing new taxes. Well, they're looking to do both.
Kelly O'Dwyer, why was the Prime Minister's office briefing journalists that the Medicare co-payment was dead and buried, only then to have Joe Hockey come out and contradict that message?
Well, it has always been our policy as announced in the budget. I certainly don't know what briefing goes on, but I can assure you that it is our policy, and there are good reasons for it.
I know a number of journalists in the gallery who were approached by certain individuals within the Prime Minister's office and told that this was going to be dumped. What happened between that decision and Joe Hockey coming out and saying, no, this is still policy?
Well, Emma, I'm going to have to take your word for that because I'm not privy to that information.
OK, isn't there going to have to come a time, Brendan O'Connor, when Labor stops singing from Tony Abbott's song sheet in opposition, stops saying no to everything and actually starts being constructive in the job of actually trying to address the deficit?
Well, we'll come up with our own policies and plans well before the next election, but what we won't be doing...
Isn't it a little more urgent than that?
But what we won't be doing, Emma, is being a partner in crime with Tony Abbott. Tony Abbott has promised one thing and, of course, has fundamentally broken his promise. He's lied to the Australian people, and we're not going to be complicit in those lies. And, in fact, the dishonesty and incompetence of the government has been on full display this week, with a Treasurer saying one thing, a Prime Minister saying another, the Defence Minister still there who should be sacked. We've had ABC cuts, which are also, of course, a broken promise, with 400 ABC employees soon to lose their jobs. I mean, this government is chaotic, it's incompetent, and it's dishonest, and the Australian people are waking up to that.
We'll touch on various matters you raised there, but let's just stick with this for a moment. Kelly O'Dwyer, so Tony Abbott wasn't referring then to the GP co-payment when he talked earlier in the week about removing barnacles from the ship of the policy ship before the end of the year?
Well, the biggest barnacle that we face in government right now is actually the Labor Party. The Labor Party created so much of this mess that we're trying to fix up.
I'm sure Tony Abbott wasn't suggesting he was going to get rid of the Labor Party, was he?
Well, I think, though, he was trying to get rid of the roadblocks. And we know that when Brenda was talking about dishonesty and lies before, I mean, their previous government promised that they would deliver surpluses, that things would be rosy. They delivered deficit after deficit. They racked up debt. This is the situation, though, that we're dealing with, and we're trying to work through that methodically.
Kelly O'Dwyer, with respect, what were the barnacles he was referring to?
Well, look, what we're looking at is making sure that all of the policies that we present to the Australian people are the right policies. And from time to time, government looks at those policies, it listens to the advice it's received from the people, and it works through those policies in a methodical way. I think that's what he's referring to. That's what good government does. Well, that's what it should always consistently do. But the biggest barnacle we face is Bill Shorten, who refuses to fix the mess that they helped create.
Oh, come on. We know he meant there were policy barnacles that he was going to extract from the calculation. You don't want to give us some insight into which policies may well be dropped in order to perhaps get some others through?
Well, that's how I interpreted his statement in the party room. But if you've got a different interpretation, I'm sure you'll be able to raise that with him.
How are they going to get rid of Labor as a barnacle on their objectives, Brendan O'Connor?
Well, of course, what the Prime Minister was referring to is backflips on policy, and he should back down. He should back down on those matters that are completely at odds with his commitments prior to the election. But it seems that whatever thoughts he had about that, that's changed now, and it seems now that the GP tax is still government policy and there to be implemented one way or the other. And it seems to me they're exploring ways they can do it without even having the Parliament enact legislation. So that's a concern. But again, what we've seen is a government that's completely unable to deliver a budget. I mean, this is, it's December next week, and we're still talking about this budget because it is a stinker, and it is replete with broken promises, and it hurts pensioners, it hurts the unemployed, it hurts families, it hurts students. It pretty much goes after everybody, and that's why the government's having so much trouble.
Brendan O'Connor, Bill Shorten's been campaigning in Victoria on the last day of the state election campaign. How are you reading the mood down there? The latest polls seem to have Labor ahead.
Well, look, I think it's going to be very close. I think Dan Andrews has had a really good campaign. He's I think, been a very good leader. He's got a very good team, and I think he's going to. I think he's going to do very well, but it is a very close election. But he's got some plans about restoring TAFE, ensuring that we see shorter waiting times for ambulances. He's got some, I think, really important ways and plans to create jobs. I mean, since this government's been in Victoria, they've gone from 4.9% to 6.8% in unemployment, 65,000 more Victorians unemployed without work, and I think there needs to be a response at the state level, and I do believe Labor could get in, and I'm confident that they'll do very well, but, it's going to be close.
Kelly O'Dwyer, the former PM John Howard has been in Victoria these last 2 days campaigning to the end, but no sign of Tony Abbott in these last critical days. Is the current Prime Minister in, as Bill Shorten says, witness protection perhaps?
Not at all. The Prime Minister was fulfilling his obligations today up in Sydney, launching one of our big ships, which Bill Shorten, by the way, was meant to attend but cancelled at the last minute. And the Deputy Leader was down in Melbourne campaigning. And the reason
Do you not think it's important to be in Melbourne campaigning for the leader?
He's been down in Melbourne campaigning before, but the Deputy Leader was here. We actually have a team, and she was down here, and she was down here for a reason, because this election is going to be close tomorrow, and there's a very clear choice that Victorians get to make. It's a referendum on two key issues. The first is the East-West link. Under Premier Denis Napthine, he will deliver the East-West link, which is an important and vital piece of infrastructure for Victoria. Under Daniel Andrews, he will rip it up. He'll rip up the contract. He'll deny $3 billion worth of federal funding to Victorians. He'll also force Victorians to pay $1.1 billion in compensation, and nothing will be built. The second issue that it's a referendum on is economic management. In Victoria, under Premier Denis Napthine, we have a AAA rated economy, and that's been able to deliver record funding for health and for education, and also for that infrastructure I spoke about. Under Daniel Andrews, he pretends it's all going to be easy and that money grows on trees. He was so worried about the costings that he had that he didn't even properly submit them. He did it after the blackout period. And that's because he delivered in his previous Labor government the Mikey scheme, he delivered the desalination plant, which all blew out by billions of dollars and is still costing Victorians lots of money.
Let me ask you this, Kelly O'Dwyer. Do you think the Victorian election is in some ways a referendum on the federal government's performance? I mean, if the coalition loses, it'll be the first time in over 50 years a first-term government is thrown out.
Well, look, there's a lot of rewriting of the election history books, isn't there? And there has been over the last couple of years. But it's very much a referendum on those two issues I spoke about. It is a campaign here in Victoria on issues that matter to Victorians. And I think uppermost in the minds of Victorians when they vote tomorrow will be those issues.
Brendan O'Connor, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's going to be, as I say, it's going to be close, but I think the fact is that we've seen the federal government act in a very arrogant way to effectively suggest that they will deprive Victorians of Commonwealth money if they don't vote for the Liberal Party is political extortion. And I think it's an outrageous threat to make upon the Victorian electorate. And I think the Victorians won't respond well to that type of threat.
It's not a threat. If you're not going to build it, you don't get the money for it.
This money was originally, of course, dedicated under the previous Labor government to Melbourne Metro. Of course, it was taken out of the public transport area, and it was now being provided to this particular project. But then to deny Victorians their fair share of the Commonwealth cake on the eve of an election is going to backfire on the government.
But we're delivering both. We're delivering East-West Link and we're going to be delivering Metro Rail.
Because
you're going to build
Victorians
nothing over 4 years.
will not be lectured to and will not respond. They will not be forced to vote for someone on the basis of a federal government acting like gangsters, quite frankly.
Kelly O'Dwyer, we need to get a few more issues in before we run out of time. On election night, the Prime Minister declared that the country was, under the coalition, open for business. So why then are you hoping to charge $1,500 to foreign property buyers? Isn't that tax likely to act as a disincentive to investment?
Not at all, and it's not a tax. We're absolutely open for business, which is why we have successfully negotiated 3 free trade agreements in just over 12 months, which will mean billions of dollars for the Australian economy.
Hold on a minute, not a tax? $1,500 on foreign property buyers?
What we're proposing to do is simply have a user pay system. Currently, Emma, the Australian taxpayer funds the Foreign Investment Review Board. We're simply saying that, like so many other regulators that have a user pay system, that the Foreign Investment Review Board do the same, and that foreign investors who predominantly benefit from this scheme, when they're screened, actually have to pay a minimal fee. And we've done the costings from the Parliamentary Budget Office, and they have said that a $1,500 fee when you're talking about purchases of over $740,000 will have no impact on investment whatsoever.
OK, what do you think, Brendan O'Connor? Is it a tax?
Well,
is it a reasonable fee to help sustain the system?
Well, it's a surprise and it's a tax. I mean, the Prime Minister said there wouldn't be new taxes, and he said there'd be no surprises. Clearly, that's been proven to be wrong, and that's why the government's in so much trouble.
OK, finally, it's the last sitting week for the year next week after this week's quite tumultuous goings-on, if you like, with the Defence Minister, with the ABC and other things. Are you expecting more of the same next week, Kelly O'Dwyer?
Well, look, we've seen the Labor Party behaving very badly. We've seen them be very disruptive during question time, trying to create this impression of chaos. They're deliberately trying to get themselves thrown out of the House. And Bronwyn Bishop, as Speaker, is trying to restore order to the House and decorum, and has had to do that with all these repeat offenders. I think that hopefully Bill Shorten will display some leadership over his team, and that they will behave in a manner that is fitting those people who are privileged enough to actually represent represent their constituency in the nation's parliament.
Hold on a minute, let me ask you this question. What's the difference between Julia Gillard saying there'll be no carbon tax under a government she leads and Tony Abbott saying there will be no cuts to the ABC if he wins government?
Well, look, I mean, you can do the analysis and comparison if you like, Emma. Tony Abbott himself has said that he's looking for efficiencies, and that is because we are looking for efficiencies right across government. We're having to do that because of the legacy left by the Labor government, and we were promised that we would do that at the last election, that we would fix the problems left by Labor, and we're doing it.
Brendan O'Connor, a last observation.
Well, clearly, look, there's been a... there were 18 members of Parliament thrown out of question time yesterday, all of whom were Labor. But that's not the big issue. The big issue is that this week we saw 400 jobs being announced to be cut from the ABC, 300 of which will be gone by Christmas. And of course we've got a Defence Minister who refuses to apologise to the workers at the Australian Submarine Corporation for abusing them, effectively, in the Parliament, and he should be sacked. And we've got a weak Prime Minister who won't sack his Defence Minister, and we've got a Treasurer and a Prime Minister at odds with each other over the GP tax. We've got a government that's incompetent, and indeed it's chaotic, and it's dishonest, and that's why it's a problem, and indeed it will have an influence on what happens tomorrow.
We'll have to leave it there. Brendan O'Connor, Kelly O'Dwyer, thanks very much.